Can we get started, Catherine? Yes? Okay, welcome everybody to the second panel of the Faculty Commons Graduate Student Research Conference hosted by the Center for Ideas in Society at UC Riverside. The title of the panel is Embodied Knowledges. My name is Chikako Takeshita, preferred pronouns she, hers, and I'm an associate professor of gender and sexuality studies. I am your co-host with my colleague, Anthea Kraut from dance. Before we begin, I'd like to do the land acknowledgement. In the spirit of Rupert and Janet Costo's founding relationship to our campus, we would like to respectfully acknowledge and recognize our responsibility to the original and current caretakers of this land, water, and air, the Cahuilla, Tomba, Luiseño, and Serrano peoples, and all of their ancestors and descendants, past, present, and future. Today, this meeting place is home to many Indigenous peoples from all over the world, including UCR faculty, students, and staff, and we are grateful to have the opportunity to live and work on these homelands. So a little bit of housekeeping before we turn it over to our presenters. Please mute during presentations. And this session is being recorded. Please use the chat for questions or comments. And we do have an interpreter today. So if you want to have the Spanish interpretation, you need to opt into that channel. Is that obvious how to do that? Okay. And Ivan is going to communicate with you in the chat if you need interpretation services. During the discussion session, you can raise your hand in the raise hand feature to ask questions, or else you're welcome to put your questions in the chat and we'll pick them up. So now I'm going to introduce the first presenter. The first presenter is Cuauhtémoc Peranda from the dance department, and they are part of the Faculty Commons in Latinx and Latin American Studies. The title of the presentation is Two-Spirit Voguing and Critical Spectatorship. So take it away.
All right. Piali Kuali Tonali, no toca Cuauhtémoc Peranda Juan Dante Loren, no Nancy Totoca Amparo de Anda Juan Overall Mother Chanel International Lopez Loren, no Tata Totaka Joe Perez Jr., Juan Founder and Overall Father Antonio Loren, no Wipa Tlali Awawas in Tepecme Santa Cruz Juan Tepepakilitzli Iwikaat, no Tlaloque Osolo Ipan Kapuli Klalo Chachelique. Hello, good day to you. My name is Cuauhtémoc Peranda and overall Prince Dante Loren. My mother is Amparo de Anda and overall Mother Chanel Lopez International Loren. My father is Joe Perez Jr. and overall founding father Antonio Loren. And I am from the land of the Awawas of Santa Cruz, of the Santa Cruz Mountains and the Pacific Ocean. Next slide, please. I am a water jaguar, a water protector. I am Mescalar Apache, Mexica Chichimeca, and Cano. I'm also a two-spirit butch queen voguer who walks the old way in the house ballroom scene. I am both an 11-year member of the house ballroom scene and also a researcher of Vogue. As both, I am an outsider-insider with tongue-in-cheek, I'm ballroom adjacent. At this point, I would normally go into a land acknowledgement, but we did that. So thank you very much. Now that I have completed my introduction and land acknowledgement borrowing from our introduction today, where I sit in Zoom broadcast in Riverside, or better known by its indigenous name, Pachapa, I would like to say that land acknowledgements are becoming a broader, important practice by higher education and community-based institutions. And while this may seem like a positive effect, our realities, the practice does carry issues. Too long have acknowledgements and recognitions fallen short, acting as temporary solutions without medicine in order to subdue resistance and continue the colonial destruction of this land. But for now, I am happy to see this practice continue. I am critical of its incompleteness. And I dive from land acknowledgements into a deeper inquiry, which is recognition. Next slide, please. Before I continue, I want to openly state that this paper is still very rough. I am still working out a lot of ideas, and I'm using this conference opportunity to work out some of my most challenging aspects of my research. More, this paper is an adaptation of a paper I previously presented at the Native American Students Graduate Student Conference, Native American Studies Graduate Student Conference at UC Davis, which tracked trends of the house ballroom scene land acknowledgements to get a contemporary Black and Indigenous mutual recognition and acknowledgements into the forefront. So please bear with me as I shift from acknowledgement to recognition and then to spectatorship. Next slide, please. Seeing. On Thursday, May 27th, 2021, Dr. Brenda Dixon Gottschild presented for the Christina Lindbergh Schlunt Lecture in Critical Dance Studies and Dance Making, entitled Samkofa Arobos Phoenix, Reckoning with Race, where she continued the work of her seminal text, The Black Dancing Body, to look into how deeply Black we are as Americans. This lecture was a response to Professor Jose Luis Reynoso's call to look towards anti-racist futures of dance in the post-pandemic academy, and to which Gottschild advocated for a deeper review of the deep anti-Black racism that still exists in the thinking and embodiment of the academy. For her, to confront it will lead us towards otherwise solutions and stronger intellectual pursuit. And in her conclusion, towards the end of the questioning and answering period of the lecture, Dr. Gottschild called for scholars, particularly those who look at dance and write dance descriptions to evidence our topic, to be clear about how we are looking at bodies, movement, narrative, and aesthetics that are in front of us. She argues that there is no observation, interpretation, and description without a theoretical foundation, a lens by which we are already biased. And yet, across American dance studies, teaching, and pedagogy, there persists a notion that dance literacy is generalizable and not dependent on salient philosophies that were foundational to the academy. This is a problem, yet Gottschild provides us with a solution, which is to be open and honest about how we look and study our objects and subjects of research. This leads me to question, how can I look at the dance form of voguing and bring forward my perception, my descriptions of it, as I interpret it, as an indigenous dance, while also attending to its philosophies, critiques, and theories, its thinking, as a Black and brown transgender and queer urban street dance. In all honesty, I was lost. Yes, my voguing is the voguing of a Siwa Yolo, a two-spirit butch queen who is indigenous. Yes, there are other ballroom walkers who identify as indigenous via bloodlines of the Americas or via the Black and brown diasporas. But that's not seeing. That's not it is instead some crude way, perhaps engaging with a disturbing practice of authenticating by racializing. What is more interesting for me is how I see voguing as it relates back to my indigenous aesthetics, philosophies, and communities. That is where my research is, and just as much as the critical inquiry for the dance form is a way for me to see how I connect to voguing via my indigenous upbringing. I see voguing and I can interpret it with an indigenous lens, as Dr. Gottschalk calls, but voguing seems to, and with a side eye, it wonders if I am getting the fullest understanding of the dancing culture. This is the shady exchange that through a circle of reciprocity recognizes incompleteness and pushes us to do better. Next slide, please. Von Vogue Jam. As I have brought, oh, actually, go to the previous slide, please. Von Vogue Jam. As I have brought up land acknowledgements in my introduction, I have found them quite a useful example of contemporary recognition and a practice of reciprocity. Balls, where voguing is most prevalent, and the broader house ballroom scene has been starting to engage in a practice of recognition and acknowledgement via its own reciprocal forms of spectatorship. On the Von Vogue Jam website, which is a platform for Von Vogue Jam's education, which is an NGO in Canada, founded by Poshel and Vin, there's an acknowledgement that's written as follows. Von Vogue Jam respectfully acknowledges we operate on unceded territories of the Coast Salish people, including the territories of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh nations. We seek to honor and uphold ongoing relationships to the land and its stewards as we work on these territories. As far as land acknowledgements go, this one by Von Vogue Jam is quite generic, no shade. However, their commitment to practicing land acknowledgements is consistent. In their COVID-appropriate home improvement ball on July 29, 2020, they had a local Two-Spirit tribal member welcome the participants and spectators to the ball in a traditional way of song. Von Vogue Jam, it seems, is interested in engaging with First Nation people so that dances can be practiced in better ways. And this example seems to be following a trend that can be witnessed in balls that have occurred throughout the West Coast. Next slide, please. What is ballroom? Because you may not yet know, the Black and Brown LGBTQ+ house ballroom scene is a unique dance form, voguing or performance, has become mainstream through popular media, through such cult classics like Paris is Burning, and now HBO's Legendary. The purpose of my work is to study voguing, Vogue performance, pop, dip, and spin, old way, and all its various names and styles and techniques, all which are specific terms which focus on a dance form that is paired with genders, of which there are 8, and I won't go into them right now. That said, voguing is a complex and varied dance form already well categorized and described within the house ballroom scene. Vogue in the house ballroom scene and its primary Black and Brown Latinidad culture has primarily Black and Brown Latinidad cultural influences, which are often from people with roots and practices from Afro-Latinx indigenous descent. But when one goes to the ball in the United States, the majority of ball participants are Black folk. And so to say Vogue is a Black dance and part of Black culture cannot be understated. For the last 5 to 6 decades, the house ballroom scene has protected its own members and practices by keeping it away and underground. And so the lack of outside acknowledgement of Vogue is a method of protection that is now in shift. Through land acknowledgements, the ballroom scene seems to be making room for Indigenous peoples and practices. But what comes forward when seeing Vogue, and not through but I ask, what comes forward when seeing Vogue, not through a Western theoretical lens, but instead through an Indigenous one? Next slide, please. Dance descriptions are an important part of the field of dance studies, and it is our consistent methodology for contextualizing our study of dance, which is often fleeting, perhaps even immaterial. While video is becoming more and more a part of dance scholarship, with digital humanities advancing the field of dance in this way, being able to capture dance via description remains crucial to our work. So to study the dance form of Vogue it's important to utilize the cultural scholar Bell Hooks, who in her writing Is Paris Burning, in her book Black Looks, states that Paris is Burning was a documentary film by a white cisgender Jewish lesbian who was an outsider looking in and unwilling to provide a critique of her own interpretations. What we see when watching the voguing and ballroom culture in that film is an interpretation, a lens that is filtered to highlight the spectacle of Black drag balls and focus on the pleasure of white supremacy. This is to say that any creative or critical work that seeks to compose a review of a culture or an artwork is vulnerable to one's own desires and pleasures. Laura Mulvey in Visual Pleasures and in Narrative Cinema supports this vulnerability by providing us with the psychoanalytic term scopiophilia, or joy of looking. For Mulvey, when taking other people's objects, we are subjecting them to a controlling and curious gaze. Our most instinctual and perhaps perverse impulses provide us with the creativity to look, interpret, describe, and continue looking. And so to provide an honest dance description means to provide an understanding of one's vulnerable passions in seeing. When I see Vogue via a queer lens, a two-spirit lens that is filled with Indigenous erotics and perhaps even honestly decolonial impulses. But bell hooks, Benedictine Gottschalk, and performance studies scholar from Mona Vera provides me a way to do justice to the Black and brown form of voguing. Hooks writes that we can see with a Black feminist oppositional gaze, which asks us to think critically of our accounts and challenge the racism that is deeply engendered in American scene. Gottschalk, in her book, The Black Dancing Body, through reading American Dance Against the Grain, provides us with a roadmap of African-American aesthetics to deploy in our analysis of Black dance, thereby helping us to remove ourselves from not only our own biases and vulnerable interpretations. And performance study, and in performing Queer Latinidad, Dr. Rivera Severa provides us with the philosophies of fresa, theories of the flesh, and choreographies of resistance that can ground in a review of voguing in Latinx anthologies. Seeing and then writing dance descriptions with these aesthetics, lenses, and gazes serves to broaden this research project's ethical production of analysis and begins to fabricate a basis for ballroom spectator literacy, or critical spectatorship. Attending to our own scopophilia, as well as using research lenses, moves us beyond looking at Vogue as a spectacle for consumption and towards a dance art with deep meanings and knowledge. Asia West. Next slide, please.
Okay, and just a 5-minute warning also.
All right, perfect. In LA on April 4th at around 4 a.m., legendary overall mother Asia West of the House of West took to the floor, the runway, to compete in the legendary performance category at the public performance event Function Ball, hosted by legendary father Marcus Tichy, entitled The April Fool's Ball Part 2. She didn't start at the bottom of the runway, as most do. Instead, she cut in front onto the side. Adorned in a cute little checkered girl's uniform, she embodied a full developed femme queen, penny proud of the Disney television show The Proud Family. It was what the category called for. This is an April Fool's Ball. It's about comedy. But to get her 10, she did not show her elements in a clean sequence. Instead, with a claw of fine bright nails, she carried and carved a space and collapsed out forward onto the edge of the spectators. Girl, you know who I am. I am here. Is this what you want? With the commentators chanting her name, Asia, 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 and her house chanting, Ew, let's go, West. She was feeling the hype, the energy drawing into herself, fluttering hands into the air and the light of the catwalk. She found place to pop into the music and feeling her body. With a jump and spiral spin to the floor, she completed her first dip and the spectators snapped in her direction. She was bringing it to the room and it seemed to glow. With a few more turns, jumps, dips, and catwalks, she exited the runway, confident She got her 10s across the board and would qualify for a battle for her trophy. Her dancing was not only beautiful, but she had the fame, status, and skill to draw in attention to her through her Vogue, which is a source of energy that in many ways mirrors perhaps indigenous practices. At the ball, I sat with my family at the legendary House Lorraine International, and I was in awe and inspired. I felt that Asia's Vogue was more than a dance. It was a statement of who she is, a validating force, and of other transgender women. Through her shady attitude and voluptuous dipping and spinning up and down on the floor, she, to me, yielded a spiritual experience that I know from when the smoke keepers gather prayers to send it to the spirit world. As a two-spirit butch queen myself, this is what I see. And more, this is the transformational dancing of spirit and community that draws me back to this place. With Gottschalk's Africanist aesthetics, high affect juxtaposition perhaps is a great way to interpret Asia's voguing as a virtuosic display of transgender interpretations of this dance thinking. However, she was not only calm and energetic, virtuosic and cool, she was expressing her femininity, shading her competition with style and confidence. There was a political motive behind her movements. This Vogue was not just a dance displaying movements, but proclaiming herself and telling her story. What I understand here is a voguing that is still in dispute. What I saw in her, I was reminded of Black transgender justice is also still in dispute. And perhaps this is how we can see voguing, a dance of resistance to settle or become more despite the dispute, political unrest. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Cuauhtémoc. I think we're going to save the questions for the discussion session. Is that right? Okay. Well, then I would like to introduce our next speaker, who is Kyrié Owen. And here we are. Her presentation is titled Narrative Medicine Through an Indigenous Ideology. Oh, and I should mention that Kyrié is from the creative writing department, and she is part of the faculty commons of Reclamation and Native American communities. So thank you.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for having me. I suppose you're all wondering why I've called us all here today. First, I want to say thank you to CIS and my fellow panelist, Cuauhtémoc, and also Allison Hedgecoke for encouraging me to join and participate. I really appreciate everything. All right, so let's jump in. All right, today I want to talk about narrative medicine through an Indigenous ideology. This is a practice that I've started researching just recently and something that I found that I'm very passionate about. To begin, I'd like to just talk about Western medicine, which is, it uses the SOAP ideology, which is an acronym for subjective, objective, assessment, and plan. This assumes the patient is subjective and the physician is objective with a binary that knowledge is soft or hard. This kind of dismisses the idea that the patient can be an expert of themselves, of their bodies, and of their history, which can actually be kind of detrimental for people with mental illness or trauma, whether it's personal trauma or historical and intergenerational. I also want to mention that it's also rooted in colonialism, oppression, and white supremacy. Much of our current medicine is actually stolen from traditional healing practices of Black, Brown, and Indigenous peoples. I believe it was Rothschild who actually interviewed a lot of Indigenous people and really took that as her own medical practice without crediting the people that she interviewed. But I'm gonna have to double check that, so don't take me up on that. Okay, so my solution for this is that we shift our gaze into the world of narrative medicine. So narrative medicine is the art of healing by upholding the values of storytelling. A lot of times when we think of story, we just think of like what a narrative arc is. So beginning, middle, and end, but there's the root of what storytelling is and what we can gain from it and what it gives other people too. So that's a contextual sensitive communication. It gives us empathy, it restores humanity between us. It also reminds us that the physician is also just as much of a human as the patient is. We're all humans with complexities and histories, and we just come together within a space with the goal of treating and communicating. And through that, we find empathy with one another. And then ultimately, we get a sense of unitedness when we connect with one another on that level. Because of this, you get this relationship-centered care. You give and you take and you both gain things from one another. This is embracing dialogue and collaboration. This makes treatment a collaborative project, which is ultimately rooted in Indigenous ideology. This is something that a lot of Indigenous communities uphold. This is a quote or a poem taken by Ceremony by Leslie Marmon Silko. I will tell you something. I will tell you something about stories, he said. They aren't just entertainment. Don't be fooled. They are all we have, you see. All we have to fight off illness and death. You don't have anything if you don't have the stories. So a lot of Indigenous narrative medicine is geared towards treating, recovering, and living with trauma, especially that of intergenerational and historical trauma. This manifests differently than like personal trauma. Actually, a lot of scholars call it the soul wound. And the thing about intergenerational trauma is that it's inherently cultural and communal. It's something that a lot of Indigenous people share with one another, whether or not like you are a part of the same tribe, just across the board. And this is because of, I mean, it's a shared experience, but also it's rooted in the idea that a lot of Indigenous cultures view relationships as an active experience instead of just something you have. Like a lot of times Western society views things as what we have. And so it translates to relationships as well. We have a relationship, whereas a lot of Indigenous communities really view that as active. It's something we live and it's something we experience with other people. And so this is a quote by the scholar Wilson, who says, rather than viewing ourselves as being in relationship with other people or things, we are the relationships that we hold and are a part of. But the really cool thing about recovering from intergenerational trauma and historical trauma, and the fact that it's cultural and communal, is that it implies that there's communal healing involved as well. There was this workshop that was done with the Maori people in New Zealand. And it was a workshop where a bunch of participants came together and they shared their stories with one another. And through that, they really found a sense of unitedness by saying, oh, you've had that experience and I have as well. And when we share stories, we can relate and we can grow from it. And this is one of the participants who spoke on that experience. She said, it's about talking through their story. You can hear the growth. It's almost like watching a flower, like a peony rose, beautiful flowers, and it's just like watching them burst into life. And that was Moana. So next we can talk about different modes of recovery, and there's quite a few. And as we talk about narrative medicine and sharing your stories, there's the concept of the mythic mind, which is the act of transmitting medical practice or medicinal practice and traditional knowledge through the sharing of stories. And this is actually an act of reclamation and recovery. By sharing stories, you can recover from intergenerational trauma, or at least you can start the process. So there are both traditional and contemporary modes of recovering from intergenerational trauma. Renda Dione, Luke Madrigal, and James Fenelon lay out 3 modes of storytelling as medicine, especially for trauma recovery. So they note Cahuilla bird songs, the Paiute North Star story, and the Kairos blanket exercise. But there's so many more, and that's why I also included digital storytelling in the contemporary modes of recovery. So in the traditional storytelling, we have the Cahuilla bird songs, which focuses on reconnection and how story is a living entity. It evolves and it grows. It's spiritual and with us. And then next, in the traditional sense, we have the Paiute North Star story, which focuses on the idea of safety and how in trauma, the idea is to reclaim that safety as well and acknowledge its presence. Then next we move on to the contemporary mode of recovery. One of the examples is the Kairos blanket exercise, which focuses on the act of telling a story. It's an experiential interactive learning practice that was created in response to the 1996 report of the Royal Commission on Aboriginal Peoples. This is an interactive recreating of 500 years of history, including it goes through all the phases of everything that we have experienced up until now, from pre-contact to early contact, colonialism, and then current re-indigenization. And then last but not least, we have digital storytelling. This can include a variety of things. So like educational programming, cultural archives, YouTube, workshop, etc. Something that I've experienced too in this realm is the Facebook group, the Comanche Cultural and Historical Preservation Group. So that's been just really enlightening and also a really good way to reconnect with culture and to learn from elders and fellow Comanche, even though I'm not close to the land or to Oklahoma. And then next we have social media. So Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok, and different types of social media. It's a great way to connect with other natives, to join a virtual community too, especially in like a, current COVID world where you can't actually, it's difficult to go out and meet people and meet other natives. And then also to engage in discourse. I sometimes roll my eyes at Twitter discourse, but it's always really helpful to join the conversation and to hear other people's thoughts on different issues. And this is a quote by another participant, Tue, a part of the Maori people, that workshop we were just talking about, who said, "It would be amazing if all the elders did a digital story of themselves. It's kind of like a continued version of oral tradition. if we could have them documented, it's a visual and you can get the spirit or the Waira spirit of the person. And then an outcome or possible outcomes of narrative medicine with this Indigenous lens is that narrative disrupts the transmission of trauma. You can kind of not quite nip it in the bud, but you can, by acknowledging it and by talking about it, you can work to move past it and through it. And then next you have re-indigenization. So that reclamation of knowledge, that the passing down of traditional knowledge through oral stories. And then you can also embrace liberation psychology. That's what it taps into, which is the sharing of truth to liberate others. And then finally, going back to the values of storytelling itself, is that we can gain empathy by sharing stories and sharing this awful thing happened to me or this awful thing happened to us, and now I have PTSD. There's a lot of symptoms that are involved, and so such as like addiction and mental illness, intergenerational poverty, etc. And so by sharing stories, we are able to gain empathy and understanding for one another who are experiencing this. But also there's many more great outcomes that can come from narrative medicine too. This is not an exhaustive list. And so as I wrap up, I just wanted to list out all the references I used. They're all such good reading, and they're all fairly accessible as far as the reading goes. So I'm gonna stop sharing my screen. But I'm also going to post a link to a handout for all the future readings as well, for like recommended readings, and then also the quotes that I included in the slides. So that's all I have for you. But thank you so much. I appreciate it.
Thank you so much, Kyrié, and thank you for sharing all the material with us. I would like to now move on to the question and discussion session, which will be moderated by Anthea.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Please join me in doing emoji claps for our two presentations, Cuauhtémoc and Kyrié. That was really wonderful, and I see a lot of interesting intersections between the work. So I just want to open it up for questions. We have about almost 25 minutes to get into a conversation now. So please, I encourage you to either raise your digital hand if you have a question that you'd like to verbalize, or post your question in the chat. Either is fine. Go ahead, Maria.
I have a very basic question, so I'll jump in. So I'm very, first of all, thank you, both Cuauhtémoc and Kyrié, presented really fascinating and important topics. I am really curious to know how each of you define Indigenous. Yeah, that's all. I'll leave it there. I'll leave it as a very, very simple question and ask you to answer in whatever way you want to, leaving possibility for an answer that is not straight, but an answer that is poetic, or that comes across in a creative or embodied way as well, because I know it's a very simple but complicated question, but I think it's really important to define how you're using it in your research. Thank you.
I'll go first. I often answer this question with, I'm not looking at American Indian. I'm looking at Indigenous, broadly defined. And often I look to Salme Maldoma and Healing Wisdom of Africa and their writing of Indigenous, and thinking of maintaining a connection to a set of people that are of us, of a place. And that to me is what Indigenous means, to engage in those practices, those knowledges, and with those community members, to be recognized as a part of that community and to recognize others in that community. That is a very broad and perhaps not popular interpretation of Indigenous. But for me, that definition is very important because it includes Black ethnic groups, Black tribal members that have been part of the diaspora and are reaching back, flying back to their Indigenous knowledges. And that is my version, my understanding of Indigenous has to be able to also include Black experiences of diaspora.
What they said. Yeah, that's a very, very broad question. I'm trying to figure out how I can answer that in the most succinct way. My current thesis is actually about reconnection and really grappling with what indigeneity means to me. And to be honest, it's something that I'm really still trying to come to a very succinct understanding about. I think that the general notion for me anyway is like the connection with the culture and the land as well. And it's something that I'm reconnecting with. I think indigeneity is a very active experience for me, especially thinking about all that my family has lost and has struggled with to keep connecting. But I think it's definitely connecting with the culture and learning more about what, like not only just the Comanche and the Acoma Pueblo is, but also what Cuauhtémoc said about thinking about global indigeneity and not silencing the voices of, or uplifting the voices of other indigenous people outside of American Indians. I should have thought of a more succinct answer before going into this. Also, I feel like, yeah, I should say the Comanche people are very funny and I like to laugh, and that's what it means to me. But I also don't want to like make light of what the question is and what that means. So I hope my answer is okay.
Both your answers are beautiful. I'm left with how the image of flying back to reconnect, flying across the waters, is so potent. And also, Kyrié, what you said about your connection to indigeneity, and I'm paraphrasing, is active, that it's based in your praxis, and your praxis as a healer who uses narrative. And I am also noticing in your responses this really fertile tension between the need to deconstruct the word indigenous or indigeneity to find the political potency of alliances, alliances that are broad, and also the need to be specific. So, you know, the way that Cuauhtémoc opened with naming, you know, to the grain of specificity, you know, their parents, and their multiple parents. And Kyrié, right now, you're referencing, you know, Comanche humor, and you're referencing very specific nations that you're connected with. So I see this really fertile tension between that the political, you know, intersections that we can make with a term as broad as Indigenous, and then the very specific references rooted in one's ancestry and practices. And so just thank you so much for helping me think through these things as well, by way of your presentations and how they relate to each other. Thank you.
I see a question in the chat from James Everson. Do you want to read your question aloud, James, or would you rather have me read it?
I could read it. I wasn't sure if there was time, but yeah. Thank you both. I was wondering if both of you could speak more about the interstices of medicine interaction and what is being repaired with medicine in each of your works. Like how the repair and how interaction is part of repair, and how medicine is understood.
Not to throw you under the bus, Cuauhtémoc, would it be possible if you could go first? I'm looking for my notes on this exact question.
I was doing the same thing. I was like, I know I said medicine, but I think I used it in a way that was trying to speak to my political motivations to heal myself and to provide some sort of therapy to queer and trans people of color whose knowledge has often been subjugated to the fringes. So I think that's what I was using medicine as. Broadly, in my own work, which was not a part of this paper, medicine is also a way of me finding church, find the gay church, which is a part of spirituality. It's an engagement with healing energies through a spiritual practice. And ballroom, voguing, balls are, I think, nexus of that kind of energy. And that is medicine. That is protection. That is what is needed to ingest to then grow. And not all medicine is hunky-dory. There are side effects. You know, there are precautions. And to me, that's important to acknowledge that it's real.
Yeah, absolutely. I really value that response. I think what I'm drawn to most in this question is what's being repaired. And as soon as I read that, I thought about what I read in Renda Dion's Luke Madrigal and James Fenelon's work is this quote, and I feel like I just can't say it any better than the quote, so I'm just going to read it for you. Because Native American activism is not focused on reconstruction after a conflict, but rather liberation from a system which has been against Native American and their cultural freedom for generations. The psychology which is more pertinent to examining Native American activism and the potential of political practice to be psychologically healing would be the study of the psychology of liberation. So I feel like just thinking about the question as just an act of medicine and an act of treatment. And I think that you can gain so much through liberation psychology by actually, like, by active liberation. That's how you can repair, even if it, or I wouldn't even use repair personally, but just growing and the act of recovery more than reparations or repairs. I hope that answers the question, or maybe I took it a completely different way, but that's what I thought of.
Just to sort of riff on that, I'm really also struck, Cuauhtémoc, in your work, I heard, or sort of thinking about that question, and what I heard from your work feels like you're offering us recognition as a kind of healing or repair for a kind of colonialist seeing that sort of cuts off reciprocity. And Kyrié, in your work, thinking about storytelling and narrative as the means towards that reciprocity, and a way and an alternative to Western medicine. And I guess I would love to sort of take up the invitation of the panel title, which I don't think any of us here decided on. I don't know who did, but to think about the role of embodiment, and the sort of the role of embodiment in that sort of pursuit of reciprocity. If you have any thoughts about that.
I think what I was looking at within my work is that embodiment is not enough. And this will be expanded in my work when I start writing about the differences between butch queen voguing and femme queen voguing, femme queen performance, and the differences within those genders in the dance form and the form, and what they mean in their stories. But my interpretation of what I'm seeing being performed is filtered through the biases, my body, my experiences, and my wishes for what I want to see. And that is not enough. Being a part of the ballroom scene, being a dancer myself, might give me access to some interpretations and language, but it doesn't give me a complete understanding about another person's experience in the dancing, in the performance. But it's important to, I think, look at not only with eyes and an oppositional gaze, but feel with the body in an oppositional way as well. And I think that's where my writing needs to go.
I'm so embarrassed to ask this. Would you mind re-asking the question?
Please don't be embarrassed. I threw it out there on the fly anyways. Just curious to hear your thoughts. I think just, I'm going to restate it, but to think about the role of embodiment in the model of narrative storytelling, or the approach that you're offering us, just where you see how you understand embodiment or how you see it playing a role.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. I had an inkling that was it, and I was like, okay, I'd hate to be that person that answers a completely different question. Yeah, so in my class with Allison Hedgecoke about narrative medicine, it's the class that really sparked this obsession and interest, I should say. We started the class by kind of talking about embodiment, which is that tangible visual form, not necessarily always like what embodies us, but also what we see embodied in different objects. And so we started the class really thinking about what is the story, if in a tangible form. What would a story look for us? And I think, okay, I'm going to go on a tangent here, and I'm so sorry. I think I really value that idea of where story can be embodied in different work. I am obsessed with the idea of content and form. So you have a story, but what form can it take on? And that's where you get like hermit crab stories, which can manifest in like any different sort of form, whether it's like a shopping list or like a letter or like the nutrition labels or something. And so that's where you get like different types of stories and the embodiment of that. And that's why I love the title of this panel, which is Embodied Knowledge, because story is knowledge inherently. Yeah, and so and even when you look at oral tradition too, and oral storytelling, that's embodied in the words. And even when you put that out, it has like the spiritual form that you can transmit from one person to the next, and it stays with them. And even that interpretation just changes the form itself. And so it's ever growing and evolving. And yeah, I have a lot of that, sorry.
I have a question, actually, if I can. Kyrié, I was just wondering from your presentation, you talked about liberating psychology or liberatory psychology, and about by sharing and showing one's truth as a practice, and it was under your bullet point of re-indigenized or re-indigenizing. And I'm wondering with this word psychology as a empirical scientific modality to understand the psyche that is very Western, and what is truth? What is sharing one's truth? Can you define for me what kind of truth? Because there's colonial truths, and then there's indigenous knowledge truths, and then there's queer truths, and then there are political truths. So I was wondering if you could help me understand that a little bit more.
I'm glad you asked that. I'm going to be completely honest. This is still something that I'm learning more about, so I feel like I can't completely speak on the issue, or what the concept is, because I'm still learning. But I did put it in the slide, so I should. I think that this is a really interesting point of like truth versus perception, or yeah, truth versus perception and reality versus fact. That dichotomy of all four of these concepts, because they're all kind of conflicting. And I love that you brought up the idea of that there's different types of truth for different people and different communities, and like what colonial truth is versus what indigenous or like queer truth or anything. I think what I'm most drawn to is the idea of personal truth, because that's the one that I think I can speak on for sure. Yeah. Honestly, can I think of that and then get back to you, or would you want to have a
Totally okay. Yeah, get back to me. I'm curious about this.
Yeah, the questions in the chat are making me think about what are the costs when, or what's the place of embodied knowledge in academia, which is, of course, something I think we're all embodied, so we all have to encounter in some form. But this is also making me think about like what are what's the cost of having to do the work to assert knowledge as embodied? Sorry, a frog in my throat. Right, so I don't know, I think about this a lot for dance studies, like what do we have to do to sort of argue for embodied knowledge? And then what might be lost in the fight of having to assert that? Because I'm also just really excited, Cuauhtémoc, about what you're saying about it not being enough as well, right?
I'll respond to that and say, this is something that I'm not sure if it's going to actually be in my dissertation or not. Probably the book when I have more time. But it is very much voguing in the house ballroom scene, arts and the social, the gathering, that medicine of being embodied with each other, perhaps not even walking and performing, just critically spectating, that gathers people together. And NGOs such as HIV/AIDS health clinics, housing insecurity projects, and others such as social services that are trying to access queer and trans, brown and Black peoples, go to those balls in order to find constituents. It is necessary that bodies congregate and share and exchange with each other. And many systems depend on that. Our system right now that we're experiencing together via virtually is an embodied moment. We are here present. I'm not reading through a text and we're not exchanging emails. We are physically present in this virtual room, and we are sharing our space, our time, our living, our breath together. And that makes these conferences run. That makes intellectual exchange occur. Without acknowledging the embodiment of it, the performance of it, we lose what the vitality of these exchanges, right? Because we know during this pandemic, we have had to go without seeing each other, without meeting, and that has only hurt our work, I believe. And I think this is a great time to really acknowledge the body and its need to be present.
Thank you so much. That I think we are at or just past time, so we'll let that be the last word, and I appreciate that reminder. Yes, maybe I'll read, Chikako, your statement as the last one. There may be a cost to working with embodied knowledges, but it's important to decolonize the academy. And I love Cuauhtémoc's response about we have to come together physically because this is the way we transmit knowledge. Yes, and just if we could all one more time thank our panelists, and also thank you all of you for attending today during this week 11 of the longest year in the history of the world. I really appreciate you all being here. Thank you again.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you. And go to the other panels. It's wonderful to see so many people attend. There were 29 participants.
Yeah, that was so great. And I like the chat just blew up at the end. It feels like there's a real hunger for talking about this.
Yeah, no, you provoked it. So thank you for that, Anthea. Yeah.
Well, that's all. It's all I ever want to talk about. So. Cuauhtémoc, you did beautifully.
Thank you so much.
Yes.
Thank you so much for pressing forward and backward.
Of course, it was my pleasure.
Thank you, Chikako, for introducing our panel and for doing the land acknowledgement.
You're welcome.
Thank you for being present for us and supporting graduate research.
Yeah. Okay, take care, you guys. I guess I'll
Bye.
And okay, bye.
Okay, yeah. Talk to you soon, Anthea.
Okay, I hope so. Take care. Have a good summer if I don't see you.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, bye.